Hello, everybody. Thank you for joining us today. This is our monthly web tips for Winshuttle. My name is Beth Johnson. Looking at those who are logged in so far, I know many of you, and some of you, welcome. We haven't had you in these sessions before. So just some quick logistics. We have everybody on listen-only mode right now, so you are muted. If you have questions, please type them in and I'll track them. If it makes sense to have our presenter pause, I will do so. If not, I'll save them all for the end of the presentation and we'll go through them. We really would love this to be interactive. So type in, and we have a couple polls that we'll launch just to make sure, we're getting feedback about the session and kind of baselining everyone's skill set. So this is a monthly series, and this month we're covering topics around workflow. Odd-numbered months, we cover topics around Transaction Query Central, some of the other Winshuttle tools. So this year, we're inviting everyone in the Winshuttle community to join us for these. Next year, it will be part of our series that is free to all of our solutionCARE customers, and we'll talk about that a little bit later on after the presentation. But I wanted to dive in to the actual bulk of the material. We have Justin Barr on the line who is going to present today. And Justin has been working with the Winshuttle Workflow tool for many years, and he's also a SharePoint solution architect. So many of you may have interacted with Justin on projects. If not, here's your introduction, and hopefully you can take away a lot of tips today. I wanted to level set everybody in the audience. After our last session, we kind of chose a topic today around swim lanes, and that was based on feedback from the participants. Some of you have used the tool for a while, and some of you might be new to the tool. So if you haven't gotten your hands in this topic too often, just listen in, type in questions, and we'll be happy to resolve your open questions towards the end. So with that, thank you, and I will turn this over to Justin. Justin, just want to make sure you're off mute there.
All right, sorry about that.
There we go.
A little technical thing. I could have had the whole presentation and been mute. All right, so thank you, Beth, for the introduction and telling me to go off mute. We're going to try to keep this at a high level so everyone can get a little bit of something out of this web tips session. So whether you own the tool now or you don't own the tool, you still have problems and around how are you going to assign people to swim lanes? How are you going to get participants involved and have people approve or take an action on your workflow and your process? So this web tips is going to be around assigning people to swim lanes. So we're going to go ahead and cover an introduction and a definition of what some of the common definitions that you'll see when we're talking through this web tips session. We're going to talk about the resolver process. What's the process that Winshuttle takes to assign people to swim lanes? And then lastly, and probably the bulk of the content, we're going to give a lot of examples on these workflow participant resolvers. Sometimes you use only one or two, and there's no real single place of what is this for? Why would I use this versus why would I use this other one? In some cases, you could use either or. It's just a personal preference. In other cases, it makes more sense. So we'll cover some of those today with our workflow participants and our examples, and we'll give you some good demos. All right, some just general level setting. Winshuttle Workflow is a business process management platform or solution. It's used to automate your business processes from capital appropriation requests to employee onboarding and offboarding, and it integrates seamlessly with other systems. Specifically, it sits on top of SharePoint but can integrate with your ERP system, can integrate with your CRM system. So it's a tool that we not only use to facilitate connecting systems and processes, but we use to automate these system interactions, and we assign people to these processes. So the definitions in the center are definitions that we use a lot. So when I say workflow, what I mean by workflow is a graphical representation of the flow of information, either a document or form, throughout your enterprise. So we'll be showing a lot of the workflow today and how we're going to be assigning people. We don't have complex workflows today. We wanted to keep it very simple. We wanted to show you how to assign people to the swim lanes in the process, but we didn't want to actually develop a completely complex form and workflow. So the process, when we're talking around the process, it's all the necessary functions within the workflow. It can include the workflow itself, but it's documents, forms, it's the supporting structure. So it's the process from start to finish is what we mean by process. For a swim lane, that's where we're going to be assigning a lot of people today and showing you how to assign people to swim lanes, and it actually goes with the next definition there, a term, is participants. So a swim lane is a functional role within your company. Example swim lanes could be your HR department or a CIO. So specifically, it's a functional role within your process, and the participant is the person assigned to that swim lane to perform that function. We're going to talk about today how it could be a single person. It could be a person from a certain role, so there could be multiple people in a role, but you only want to assign one person, or there could be a team from role. So the originator is quite simply the person who actually started the form in the workflow, and the process owner sometimes is referred to as the originator, but can also be used as somebody else that manages your overall process. And then an assignment is just a task that is assigned to the person, and it shows up usually in your Winshuttle task list, and you'll see that you have an assignment such as approve capital appropriation request, or enter CRM system data, or go do any task that you would work within your process. Okay, so the resolver process, what I wanted to cover is what are the steps that Winshuttle takes to resolve people to swim lanes. So what is the first step that Winshuttle is going to do? So before the assignment page is displayed, before on the screen you see something, Winshuttle examines each swim lane to see if it's been resolved by at least one person. So it at least has to have one person assigned to that swim lane. The participant resolver feature in the swim lane collection editor, and what I mean by that is if you're creating swim lanes using the tool, you're going to have a collection editor over on the right side that allows the different participant resolvers, and we're going to cover those participant resolvers today. That's specifically around our topic, but allows you to configure how participants in the workflow are assigned. Step 3 is for each unresolved or unassigned swim lane, Winshuttle is going to invoke the process method for the workflow participant resolver to attempt to assign a person to that swim lane. So what's that saying is, if you have a participant resolver, and say for example the participant resolver you're using is the SharePoint query participant resolver, Winshuttle is going to go and try to query your SharePoint list and get that information, who's going to be assigned to that swim lane. So for example, if you're going against a SharePoint list called buyers, and your organization is, or your company code is 123, it's going to go to the SharePoint list, find the buyer for company code 123, and it's going to assign it to that swim lane. The fourth step is if no resolution was possible, Winshuttle asks the workflow participant resolver if it would like to present markup to the end user. If the program includes the markup, the Winshuttle section at the very bottom, which is known as the process control, is actually going to display a list of people that then the originator can select. So Winshuttle is going to try to assign it to who you're setting up your participant resolvers to be, or the people that you want to be involved in your workflow. But if you can't, then Winshuttle will present a form that allows you to assign it that way, and I'll demo that today. And after assignment's been completed, Winshuttle will evaluate each swim lane again as in step 2. So it goes back to step 2. Once we find the assignment, it'll continue to validate that this swim lane is assigned. So with that quick overview, these are the types of swim lanes or participant resolvers that we're going to give examples today. And we're going to talk about each one of them. We're going to talk about the use case for it, some of the information around it. We'll cover some demos. So that, as you can see, there's a lot of different ways of resolving participants. So we have select from role, random from role, all the way down to ADO.NET query and LDAP query, where we're going to actually query a data structure. So with that said, before I get into the first demo, I'm going to go ahead and launch a poll just to get some interaction, get everyone woke up, and just a quick poll here around, do you know the difference is between a person from role, and a team from role? And we're getting some results in. We got about 53% of the vote. Okay. We'll go ahead and close the poll. Looks like we got a majority here, so I'll go ahead and present this and share this for you. So you can see that, you know, some people are sure you know what it is, the difference between a person from role and a team from role. In our first demo, we'll get into that. And 45% not really sure, so we'll make sure we explain that for you. So I'm going to go ahead and jump out of our slide deck, and we'll open up our first thing today. So we have our form here already loaded up. This is our SharePoint site. We're using SharePoint 2010. As far as a level set, we created all of our demos today inside of the new Composer product. So some of you may not be familiar with the Composer product. We're going to actually be using it today, so you'll get a kind of an overview. Our last session, we gave an overview of Composer as well. So the first one we're going to look at is the select from role. So we have this PR for participant resolver select from role.
Justin, I'm not seeing your screen right now.
Okay. Let me go ahead and close this and reopen it then. Do you see my screen now that has Google on it?
I'm actually just seeing the poll results.
Oh, that's why. Thank you, Beth.
All right, now I see Google.
Okay. Here we go. So test that clear. Okay, this is our share.
I'm assuming everyone out there is okay. If you cannot see the screen, please type in the chat window for me. Thank you.
Okay. First one we're going to do is our PR select from role, which is a Winshuttle form that we created. And we'll go ahead and log into Composer on this screen. Okay, so this is our select from role. The use case for around the select from role is you want the originator to select who will be approving a document or a form. So there's many use cases basically around the select from role participant resolver. It is meant to allow an end user or the originator to actually select who's going to be approving it. So in some processes, you don't necessarily want to just say go to a buyer's list and give this buyer. Maybe you want to give the user a choice. So it allows the user to select the participant in the workflow using the process control, or you can use the workflow participant control. So let me go ahead and load up Composer, and we'll go ahead and open our Composer form so you guys can get a demo. Now, what I'm doing in Composer is actually the same thing, the same functionality applies in Winshuttle Designer and InfoPath. So there's only one piece that we're going to talk about today, and it's an Active Directory group that is not available in Winshuttle Designer, which is the other form and workflow. But for pretty much everything that we're talking about today can be done in both tools. So the first example we have here is we want to show the difference between a workflow participant control and a process control. So you can see on our form here we have an inline, we have a couple just text boxes. So those text boxes actually get replaced with what's in the workflow participant control. So we have our select from role, and if I go ahead and open up our field here over on the right, our properties, it says select from role. It says where do you want to put the select from role, and we can specify the text box called person from role. So the workflow participants will actually can put these in line. So an example of why you wanted to put it in line versus at the bottom is maybe you want the user to fill out the form from top to bottom, and you don't want them to go down to the very bottom to select who they want. So you can use a workflow participant, which is a info path control or a composer control, to actually allow a person to fill it out in line. And you'll notice this group called inline here. At the very bottom is a process control, and the process control, if we click on the properties here, the process control gives us the capability to show assignees or assignments right at the bottom of your form by choosing true or false. So if we flip back over to our form, to give you an example, we have our inline section here. And then we can see now that the inline, it used to look like this, where it had a person with a long text box. The workflow participant control is actually replacing that to the name of the swim lane and then putting a person in that swim lane. You can see that the person from role has a drop down, so it's allowing one person from a certain role, and then the team from role, you can see this click here to assign. So one thing we wanted to explain was what's called deferred loading. So why would you want to use deferred loading? We see a link here, but we're not really doing anything with it. So deferred loading, why you would want to use deferred loading, and that's done through the workflow participant control, is you'd want, if you have many swim lanes, and say you have 10 or 12 or even 20 swim lanes, 20 people participating in your workflow, you don't want to take the time to load up each one of the swim lanes, and it would take longer for your form to load. So if you don't want the form to take so long to load, what you do is add a participant control, and you click this defer loading button over here. And the defer loading will simply load up your form really fast, and then once the form is loaded up and the person is going to assign somebody, they click this button here. When they click the button, that's when we're going to see a group of people. So looking at our 3 different swim lanes we had our pull, we said person, person from role, and team. So person is just coded in that says just show Justin. That's who's going to be assigned to this swim lane. Justin is maybe the CIO of the company. We're going to always assign Justin to this role. Now, we never suggest doing this. It's actually against our best practice, but we definitely wanted to demo it for you. It's against our best practice because if Justin is involved in 5 or 10 workflows, you've automated many forms and workflows in your company, and Justin decides that he's going to leave your company or maybe become the CEO of the company, we need to switch who's assigned to this swim lane, so the CIO swim lane. So in that example, you would have to go back and update all 20 of your workflows to put the new person in here. So we highly recommend not assigning a specific person. Instead, use some of the other workflow participant resolvers that we're going to show you today, such as the SharePoint list query or a site group driven, which uses a SharePoint group. The person from role, the difference between the person and the person from role, the person gives you a group of people that you can choose from. So if you have a group of buyers and you want the person to select the buyer that's going to be purchasing this part, you can certainly go ahead and assign them or let them choose. And then the last one is team from role. So team from role, what that means for you is that it's allowing multiple people, not just one person. So if I want the CFO and CEO to approve it, I can simply put those two and assign them both to the swim lane, and they would have to approve it or reject it. We can also add everybody that's in the swim lane as well by just clicking on this button. So this is our inline. This is using the workflow participant control. If you don't want to use the workflow participant control, and I would say the two examples of why you would want to use it is you want it in line, you want to put it in your form, and you want this defer loading capability, so you don't want to load everything, all your people up at the same time. That's why you would use the workflow participant control. Otherwise, you could just use at the very bottom the process control, the out-of-the-box process control, where you can simply select the same and use the same functionality down here. All right, I'm going to go ahead and click on one more thing just so you guys can see the workflow. From a workflow perspective, it's just a simple approval, but really what we're talking a lot about today is the swim lane properties and these participant resolvers. So I'll go ahead and click on this one, and this is our process owner. Here's our select from role. So select from role, this is the type is person from role. So when we fired up our poll, we said, do you know the difference between person from role, and team from role? And hopefully after seeing the differences on the form, a person is just an individual person. A person from role allows you to select it, and team from role, hopefully you guys got that. All right, we're going to go ahead and go to our next participant resolver to keep it moving. And this participant resolver is going to be the random from role. All right, so our random from role, the use case around this one is that you want to randomly assign a user to a swim lane based on a workload, such as like a help desk application. If you've got 5 people on your help desk, you may not necessarily want to assign all of the incoming tickets to one person. So you want them to randomly be assigned. Some of the new features and functionalities are in 10.7 is they've actually resolved the resolver added functionality is that it will look specifically at a given task and see who has the less workload. Before 10.7, which is 10.7 we found out is scheduled to come out by the end of August. With 10.7, what they're going to do is they're going to look at your specific task and then say who has the least amount of activities. So for example, if someone's got 3, 2, and 1, the guy that's got 1 is going to get the next one. Before the random from role, it would just randomly select, and the randomness, I don't know what random algorithm they may have used, but it seemed to me when I was actually playing around with it, it wasn't really random, that it just simply went down to the next person. So if we go ahead and launch this form here, we can see down at the very bottom it says random from role, and currently it's assigned to Jessen. And if I go ahead and refresh this form, now we see it's assigned to a manager, and we can continue to refresh it, and I think what it's doing is just actually going down the list of people. So that's the random from role and why you would use it, and some of the new features coming out in version 10.7. So let's go ahead and go to our next one, which is site group driven. Now we use this one a lot, specifically like what we said before is we don't like to ever hard code. We don't like to hard code people to swim lanes. So as a best practice, we always try to use SharePoint's features and functionality such as a SharePoint group or a SharePoint list to pull people into assigned to your swim lane. That way, if people change roles or additional people come into your company or your process change, you just have to change the SharePoint group or list. So in this example, the business owner needs to be able to add or remove participants from group without involving IT. So we have another participant resolver called the Active Directory group, where it uses Active Directory, and I'll show you an example of what Active Directory is. Some people may not know what it is. It's more of an IT networking server function, and within maybe your role in your organization, you don't get to see that. So we'll go ahead and demo what Active Directory truly means and what it is. But with Active Directory, the problem lies that you need IT or someone in that group to update your Active Directory group. And so we try to leave the power in the business owner or the application owner to maintain that unless there's specific reasons not to. So That's why the use case around using this one is from the site group driven. Let's go ahead and take a look at the SharePoint group and open up our form here. So this participant resolver is fairly easy to set up. We're just going to click on site group driven, and we'll go over to our workflow. So our workflow for the participant resolver is called site group driven, and then you get into the arguments for the participant resolver. The arguments are really just random and display. So I chose display because I want to show it on the form, and that's why we're able to see it down here. Oops, sorry, down at the bottom of the form here, site group driven CEO. If I didn't want to display that, I would just put false and then it wouldn't show on the screen. But from a demo perspective, we do want to see it. And the parameters here, that's really all the parameters for site group driven, whether you want it to be random or not, which we talked earlier about what the random really does. And if we look at the participant resolver, we have a site group driven, and then right up here, the SharePoint group. That SharePoint group is what's going to determine who's going to be assigned to this swim lane. So in this example, we just assigned it to the intranet visitors, and then we're assigning somebody to that swim lane. So it's very easy to set up. You could have a SharePoint group called CEO or IT director. Any really role or job title within your organization you can set up as a SharePoint group, and then with that SharePoint group you would assign it here, put site group driven, and then everyone that's in that group is going to be assigned a task here. All right, I'll go back to our form. Pretty simple there. We've covered 3 participant resolvers so far: the select from role, the random from role, and the site group driven. Site group driven, very easy to do. If you guys have questions on those 3 right now, go ahead and type those into the chat window, and Beth will alert me. Otherwise, I'm going to go ahead and move on to our next participant resolver, which is get from user profile. Go ahead down here. SharePoint, get from user profile. So if you're familiar with the SharePoint, there is a thing called a user profile inside of SharePoint, and it comes actually with the standard or enterprise edition of SharePoint, not the free version of SharePoint. But if you are using the user profiles inside of SharePoint, the biggest thing for using this participant resolver is that it syncs with Active Directory. So we're going to give an example of a participant resolver with Active Directory, but this participant resolver specifically will sync with Active Directory, and then you can pull user information such as the employee job title or maybe the manager in this case. So in this case, we'd want to go ahead and call the manager to get the manager of the originator who's filling out the form. We have this as the it assigns a user a task from the workflow using the get from user profile. You can assign a user based on a provided column that exists within the SharePoint user profile settings. So we'll go ahead and load this specific participant resolver up to show you how it's set up. And it's PR get from user profile. I'll go ahead and click on our SharePoint here. Our participant resolver, again, is get from user profile. Our type is person from role, and if we look at the properties, the property is manager, and then you put your portal site here. So again, sometimes the documentation doesn't have exactly what to fill out each participant resolver, or it may have left things on or off. So what we wanted to show you with this WEBtips is we wanted to make sure you saw each one of these participant resolvers and how they're actually configured. So this is how you would specify the get from user profile. It'll take the current person who's logged into SharePoint. It'll use the user profile service and pull back their manager and assign it to this swim lane here. Okay. that's all we wanted to show you with the get from user profile. In our case, we do not have, we've got the free version of SharePoint running, so we don't have the user profile service. So you see down at the bottom, according to our 5 steps that we saw how Winshuttle will present the information to the user or how they'll assign people to swim lanes, we're at a spot that says, well, we couldn't really find out who your manager was, so go ahead and present to the user the markup on the screen to let them select the manager. So in my case, I would select my manager as the CEO. So this is just an example of what happens when if you have it set up and Winshuttle cannot find who your manager is, then it will actually present to the user to let them select it.
Justin, a quick question here. Is this demo, what you're assuming is that the IT department is maintaining the Active Directory data? Is that correct?
That is correct. Yep. So what we see across a lot of organizations is that specific people maintain your hierarchy in your organization, who you report to, your job title. Sometimes some organizations maintain that all inside of Active Directory, which would be an IT function. Other organizations use their HR system, such as like ADP, to maintain who the manager is that you report to. So we've had some clients that we just go grab the manager off of Active Directory, and other clients we have to go into an ERP system or into a SharePoint list, for example, that will put the manager reports to functionality inside of there and resolve it that way. So in this use case with a get from user profile that's using the SharePoint and Active Directory, we're assuming IT is actually maintaining that. All right. Okay, we're going to go ahead and go to our SharePoint column. As you can see, there are many different ways to assign people to swim lanes. So the SharePoint column use case is you want to allow the originators to select the participant and store it in a SharePoint list for easy reporting. So in this example, we have a drop down here that has a list of employees. And we'll go ahead and load up our composer so you can see that. SharePoint column. So inside of Composer, what we wanted to show you is right here we have our employee list, and we have that list as a drop-down bound to an employee's data source. And we can look at our data connections here, our left side. Over here is our data connection. So this is our this is where we're going against SQL Server to authenticate against a SQL Server database. So we're using SQL Server, and we're going to a database called reports to, and there's a table inside of reports to called reporting structure, and then we're ordering by login name, and then we're pulling back these fields. So we're pulling back employee login, manager login, and an employee name. So those are all information that's in this specific data source on our form. And then, so we have our data source, and then what we do is we click on our field, and you can do this, you have to do it a little bit different inside of InfoPath, but inside of Composer, there's a specifically a property that says promote this field, and then it tells you what name do you want to call it. So we say promote to SharePoint, which is a field, and we'll call it employee logon. So going back to SharePoint, we want to look at our actual list called PR SharePoint columns. And you'll notice over on the far right, there's this thing called employee login, and it has test/jbar. So that's going to be my login. It's promoted as a SharePoint column. So once you have your form set up, you have your data that you're allowing the employees to select. It could be coming from a SharePoint list, or it could be coming from a SQL database. no matter what, you have to promote this field so it's a column. Once this column is set up, then you can go to your participant resolver. And then for our participant resolver, we're selecting SharePoint column. And then if we go look at our arguments here, the argument that we're going to be selecting that comes from the SharePoint list is called employee login. So the SharePoint column participant resolver specifically looks at the list that's tied to the form and looks for a column in that form called employee logon. So our use case that we tied this to was if you want to simply be able to see from a reporting standpoint who was the employee. We called it employee login, but you could just call it employee that's involved with this form and this workflow, and you want to put it inside of a SharePoint list to do reporting. You can simply do that with this use case and then use this column to route your workflow around. So that is our SharePoint column. Next, we're going to go ahead and open up our SharePoint list query. SharePoint list query. And we'll flip over to our form. Okay. So the use case for the SharePoint list query is to allow application owners to change business rules and participants without involving IT. So this is an example of you have an application, you have certain people that need to participate in your workflow, maybe based on dollar thresholds or based on title or role. You can use the SharePoint list query to query a SharePoint list and pull people in to assign it to your swim lane. So these queries the properties, the SharePoint pool, there is a pull property that has a pull list, pull site, pull column, and pull query, which allows you to interactively do assignments. So let's go ahead and take a look at our workflow to see how this is set up. The first one we have up top here is the SharePoint list query, and that's our participant resolver. And then from the properties that we set up, we want to put the allow to select. We want to choose the approver column. We want to display it for our particular form. We're using a list called approvers, which is a SharePoint list. And then this is the site where the list is located, which is on my site. We have the option to choose to run this at start, so as soon as the form starts up, or we can run it at end. And then we have a query here. So what I did is I actually constructed a query against my list that says where the form name equals PR SharePoint list query and identity equals approver1. So I want to query my SharePoint list where the form is equal to the name of the form and the identifier that we're looking at is the approver1. So let's go ahead and take a look at this list. Click on list here on our left, and there's an approvers list here. So we like to set up, if you're going to be specifying a lot of approvers for a lot of different forms and you want to use the SharePoint list query, we recommend that you create an identifier and a form name, because you're going to have 10, 20, 30 forms throughout your organization that you're automating, but do you really want to put an approver list at every single SharePoint site that you're going to be putting all your forms? It could get very complicated, and to be able to change that, you're going to have to go to 30 different SharePoint sites. So what we recommend is putting an approvers list at the root of your SharePoint and then identifying the name of the form and the swim lane or the job function that you want to assign. So our SharePoint list is going to query this and say where the form name equals SharePoint list query and where the identifier equals approver1. So that's what our SharePoint list, and it's going to pull back these approvers here. So let's go ahead and look at how the SharePoint list works. PR SharePoint list query. Okay. So we looked at our approvers list, and then we see the SharePoint list query has Justin and Lance in it. One of the cool things on the Composer is there's a function that says include self, and not a lot of people see that when they're looking over your arguments for your swim lanes. So this include self here is a property that says, as the originator, should they be allowed to, say, approve their own expense report? And a lot of examples we would say absolutely not, because there's a bunch of laws around that, and you'd just be laundering money from your organization. So we as developers want to say, don't allow the person to include themselves as an approver. So we can simply choose to include self equals false here, and if we go back and look at my form, we can see that the SharePoint list query right now has Justin and Lance tied to it. But by me flipping this property to include self, we'll go ahead and publish it. Okay. All right, we have it published. We'll go ahead and refresh my form, and we're going to look at our SharePoint list query, and hopefully Justin no longer exists down here. So now just Lance exists down here. So the include self is kind of a forgotten about property. It's very good to set that to false to not allow them to prove in any way, shape, or form the originator to approve it themselves. Whether it's a purchase order request, a capital expense report, we definitely don't want to do that. And then lastly, we have the SharePoint list pool query. So the pool stuff, when Winshuttle references pool, what it's going to do is it allows this interactive assignments. So in our pool query, we just switched over to the properties to use the pool properties, but then it allows you to see who's in that SharePoint list. So if this is an example of we want to go get the location controller based on the dollar figures the expense report is for, then we don't want them to change the SharePoint list. We just want to say this is who's going to be approving your expense report. In this example at the bottom is maybe we have a SharePoint list for buyers, and then we want the person to go ahead and select which buyer they want to go for to purchase whatever product they're trying to get. So that's an interactive assignment, and that's why we use the SharePoint pool or the pool query and pool site. So if I go ahead and click on our second swim lane here, we have our SharePoint list query as our participant resolver, which is the same as the one above it. The only difference in this one is you'll see that all of the pool columns and pool list and pool queries are all filled in versus the actual columns. So that's your differences. If you want to allow interaction, this is definitely a way of doing it. And you'll also notice that this can be done with the site group driven participant resolver. So again, there's multiple ways to do something. It's really looking at the use case and figuring out whether you want to manage your information in a SharePoint list or manage your information in a SharePoint group. You know, definitely a pro for managing into a SharePoint list is that you get the capability of having just one single list, one approvers list, that has multiple forms in it, multiple identifiers, multiple approvers. So this is definitely good for that. But when you get into complex rules, such as dollar figures and thresholds, you definitely would want to create a different list to manage that information. All right, we'll go ahead and go on to our next. And this one we're going to be doing the LDAP query. We'll go ahead and open this one up. This is one that's always been a little mystifying, a little hard to get to work because different organizations have different LDAP structures. So let me see if we get, I should just call them. And I'm ADO active. I called it Active Directory. Bad naming. Okay, PR Active Directory. And we'll call it PR Active Directory. LDAP and Active Directory are synonyms. They mean the same thing. You can call it Active Directory, you can call it LDAP. It's an LDAP connection, but overall it's affectionately referred to as Active Directory. So I'm going to go ahead and pull up Active Directory for people that don't know what Active Directory is. Active Directory is just a group of structure that contains employees, their information, as well as who their manager is, and then it also gives you an authentication mechanism. So when you log into your computer every day, you're logging your credentials, and all of that information is being authenticated against Active Directory. So inside of Active Directory, you can see a lot of our employees that we've been seeing throughout these demos as a CEO, or we have myself here. And myself, some of the properties I have on my information is maybe my email address. And then we can also look at my account and see that the username, how I log in, is test/jbar. And then from an organizational structure, my manager is the CEO here. So we can see that the manager is the CEO. And then we can see also direct reports. So who reports to me? Well, we can see that Lance reports to me. So this is our Active Directory structure. And specifically, I wanted to show this Active Directory group. So before we talked about SharePoint groups and site group driven, how we can use that participant resolver. We have a Active Directory group here that has members of part of this. So IT would maintain this type of group. So in our demo today, we have our Active Directory group, which is called Test Employees, that will give you a list of employees. And we can verify that down here at the bottom we have CEO, COO, all the way down, manager and employee. And then we have Justin. We don't see Lance anywhere. So if I go look at our Active Directory group called Test Employees, we can see that these are a one-to-one relationship. There's no Lance in here. There's just Justin and CEOs. So that's how we use an Active Directory group, or how an Active Directory group can be used. If I flip over to our swim lane here, there's a thing called AD group. Now I will mention this, it's only available in Composer. It does not work, you will not see this participant resolver down here called AD group. You will not see that inside of Designer. So it's specifically a Composer function. And the way you set it up is you specify your domain, you specify the group name. So our domain is test.clearprocesssolutions.com. Our group name is called Test Employees, which should be exactly the name of your Active Directory group here called Test Employees. And then we want to put display to true and allow them to select a person. So if you do have to authenticate against Active Directory, if the account doesn't have access, you can specify username and password inside of here. So with that said, by using that participant resolver, we can see on the form our Active Directory groups here. And then lastly, we can look at the participant resolver called LDAP query. So the LDAP query, specifically with this one, we want to pull who the manager is of the person filling out the form, who's the originator manager. So with that, we have an LDAP connection. If you've never seen it, it's just LDAP://, and that's going to be your LDAP connection. Each company has their own different LDAP connections, and they specifically may want you to look at certain OUs and stuff. Something Clear Process Solutions can definitely help you out with. The name of the attribute, which is our SAM account name, and we have what attribute we want to pull back. So SAM account name, this username attribute, what that's going to do is it's going to look at who the person is that's filling out the form, and they're going to it's going to pass over your username. So in Active Directory, the field that's called for that username is called SAM account name, and the attribute that we want to bring back is the manager. So if we go look at Justin Barr, because since I'm filling out the form, if we go look at Justin Barr, we want to pull back this manager attribute called CEO. So go query Active Directory and then get the manager of Justin. So we can see at the bottom of our form down here, We have an LDAP query, the one I just showed you, and we can see that the CEO is the person that's currently being pulled back. So that's how we use the LDAP query to pull back your manager information. All right. And lastly, I think on that form, I did have a little URL here. Let's just copy this real quick. So this is a way of looking at the Active Directory screen that we were looking at and seeing what actually is the name of the property. So if you remember before, I referenced SAM account name. You can see the arrow here is pointing to that. So if you're not familiar with Active Directory, this is a really good site that just shows you the property screen and what they're actually called. Display name, SN. So they couldn't make it simple and just call it last name. They had to call it SN. So just as an FYI. And we're going to go ahead and go to our last demo, and we'll get to the end of this, and hopefully you guys have seen everything you wanted to see on how to resolve swim lanes. So our last one that we're going to be looking at is the ADO.NET query. So we've queried Active Directory, we've queried SharePoint lists, we've looked at SharePoint groups. Now we want to look at your individual business data. So you have data in your system. It may be a SQL server, it may be another server. Anything that's an ADO.NET connection, you can use this query for. And when I say ADO.NET, if you've never heard of that term or you need a connection string for it, just go to connectionstrings.com. You can see it automatically comes up for me because I'm here a lot. This will give you all of your different connection strings to a lot of different systems. Back on our example, the ADO.NET query is going to go to a SQL Server database, is what we have as our system. It's going to go to a SQL Server database, and it's actually going to pull back the reports to structure. So to demo that, we'll just go ahead and close our Active Directory here, and we should have our SQL Server Management Studio in the background. So this is SQL Server. This is what some ERP systems use as their back-end data source, or some people use just to put data in. I have a database called Reports2, and I have a table in here called Reporting Structure. And if I select top 1000 from this one, we'll simply see that all of the information, CEO, CFO, the manager, and the employee name are all stored in this table. You would not want to use this if I'm an application owner. You know, I don't have access to SQL Server, so I would use a SharePoint list instead of SQL Server. But if this is where your ERP system stores it, such as ADP or SAP has this information back here, then you can go get to it. And simply, I'm going to go ahead and show you that our current user is testjbar, and then the ADO.NET query resolves to COO. So if I open up our Composer form here, I know I only have a couple more minutes. So if we look at our ADO.NET query, and I click on our swim lane here, this is all the information that you're going to fill out: your connection string, your query, so what's the name of the table, and what are you going to get. So this says where employee login equals at SV originator. This is a key thing to know, that Winshuttle has certain key fields that they know who the originator is, and it's a key element. It's not really documented very well, but if you type in at SV originator, it's going to say whoever the originator is, pass in that employee login information. So in this example, it passed in Justin Barr as the employee, test J Barr right here, and then it says the manager is called COO. So looking at our form, this is what gets pulled back, is the COO. All right. So I'll go ahead and jump back into the deck and let Beth finish this up. Hopefully you have seen multiple ways of how to assign people to swim lanes. I know it was a lot of information, so hopefully I didn't overwhelm you, but you get a lot of different options. We've presented some use cases for each one. So Beth, I'll go ahead and
great,
turn it
Dustin.
back over.
Thank you. I guess that overwhelming amount of information is why maybe some people choose to use solutionCARE. What that is basically is ad hoc support for you from CPS, where perhaps you're moving into creating your own forms and workflows, and you're layering in functionality and complexity, but you don't want to outsource the whole thing. The ad hoc support allows you to get a little help with questions and applying best practices in new areas of functionality. We also, I know some of you on the line are thinking about the workflow piece and are very active on the other side of the Winshuttle products, which is the transaction piece. And the workflow, Winshuttle Workflow and Composer can bring those two things together so that the workflows transact with SAP, and we can help with those scripting activities as well. So if we can go to the next slide, I think the questions were addressed as we went through, but I wanted to let everyone know that coming up in September at Mullen University in Ohio, we are having our Winutopia event. And this is really like a user group environment where clients who have had success with the tool are going to talk about what their business pain was, how they use Winshuttle to help, and just give you the real-life example and stories about what they're doing within their businesses. So if you're interested in attending that, that would be great. Next month, our WEBtips session is on September 18th, and we will be covering the transaction and query tools. The other things we're really excited about is CPS is launching process templates, and the first one that's going to be available is around the purchase order request process. So it will, out of the box, have a form workflow and all the integration points with SAP that are required to route around purchase order requests. And these are key codes that everyone has a lot of. So there'll be more information about that soon. And then, of course, we're going to be at WUG in October, and we hope you are too. Before we close, I just wanted to say thank you for attending. This session recording will be sent out. I know there's a lot of information that was given today, and that recording will allow you to look back as you're working on solutions and kind of understand how Justin had set things up and maybe help you qualify which way you want to do your form and workflow. And also, I hope everyone was aware of the Composer release, but we did look at Composer today, and that is going to be the next evolution of Winshuttle Workflow, and that platform will be available with the 10.7 release. So with that, I'm going to say goodbye to everyone from all over the country and world, actually, and thank you again for attending. And there's a short survey at the end. Please, please provide some ideas for topics for next time. We want to address what you're dealing with in your organization. So thank you very much, everybody.